If you're new to Dark and Darker and are struggling with the game or are confused with what class to play, you've come to the right place. I have over 800 hours in Dark and Darker and hit max rank in both seasons. Dark and Darker just went free to play, which means lots of new players have joined the game to try it out. As a free player, you only have one class slot, meaning you'll have to delete that character and all your earned loot and levels if you decide to switch classes. With 9 different classes in the game, which one should you choose? Of course, playstyle should have a big impact on your choice along with personal preference, since your primary goal should be to have fun. Your choice also depends on if you have friends to play with or if you'd mostly be playing alone. And while at the time of this video, some classes might be generally stronger than others, game balance changes a lot as the game is in early access. After taking all of this into account, I highly recommend new players choose the Barbarian class. You'll have the highest health pool, deal the most damage, move surprisingly fast, loot very quickly, and be able to build cheap kits. The only downside of Barbarian is very bad range, but you can make up for this by using a build with high mobility. Speaking of the build, let's start with the Squire. You can't stack that many attributes in normals, but we'll still aim to raise dexterity as much as we can. Strength is tempting since it raises physical power, which affects your damage per hit, but for Barbarian, dexterity will give you more value by letting you attack faster. With that in mind, we'll wear the cloth pants and adventurer boots to add +2 dexterity. You can bring the German boot, but don't bring the shirt. I'll explain why later. The battle axe isn't great, but it's the best starting option, so take it. Also take torches, health potions, bandages, and the Francisca axe. Then tap set base gear to save your loadout and click equip base gear to switch to this setup. For your character skin, you could stick with default and that's perfectly fine. I'm using the Nightmare Skeleton skin for a bit more armor, but you won't have that skin unless you got at least Pathfinder rank in Ranked Season 1. If I want high mobility with white level gear, I could put on the Lizardman skin to have a weaker helmet benefit with no movement speed penalty. But as a free player, I'm sure you're not thinking of buying skins yet, and these all make tiny differences anyway, so just use the standard human. For perks, start with Crush. Crush is amazing. With any two-handed weapon, you can now break down doors in a single hit. When chasing down ranged classes that run away from you, they'll often close a door in your face to slow you down, since opening a door takes much longer than closing a door. But with Crush, you can immediately pull out your two-handed weapon and destroy that door so you don't lose the chase. On top of that, you can now break any non-metal chest by crushing it with your two-handed weapon. This makes it much faster to loot chests, even though you have the second lowest interaction speed in the game. Just bear in mind that the loot will stack on top of each other, which can sometimes cover up good items. But if you get in the habit of leaving space for large loot so you can see the smaller loot, this won't be a huge problem. Remember, you can shift right-click to quickly drop unwanted items from your inventory. For your next perk, run Robust. Not much to explain here, it's just 15% more health. But that makes a big difference for the class that already has the highest health pool in the game. And since the Steam release patch raised everyone's health, that makes this 15% increase even more significant. Next, run Savage if you're not wearing chest armor. Since this guide is for new players, I recommend you don't wear chest armor so you can move faster and run Savage. This perk gives you a damage increase equal to 10 more strength, which is easily worth giving up a white chest piece for. But if you're using higher rarity gear, keeping the chest piece might be better, in which case you drop Savage for something else. Finally, run Berserker to make you even stronger when you're low on HP. This can give up to the equivalent damage boost of 33 points of strength, depending on how low your HP is. While it is true that this perk gives 0 value when you're at full HP, it's often super critical for pulling off clutch wins against other meleeers by helping you win your trades. There are honorable mentions for perks though. This won't be relevant for this build, but if you decide to run an axe, you can use axe specialization to increase weapon damage by 5. Since this build won't be using an axe though, the perk is useless for us. Iron Will is great if magic users are causing you trouble or if knockback is becoming a problem. But your large health pool and decent base magic resistance should be enough against magic users, and knockback isn't very common. Plus, you'd have to sacrifice some kind of melee perk in this build to make room for Iron Will, and physical damage tends to be a larger problem than magical for barbarians. Potion Chugger is an amazing perk for sustain. You get 20% more healing from potions in half the time. This makes it easier for you to heal yourself just by drinking potions without having to rely on bandages with your poor interaction speed. And finally, Treacherous Lungs is a nice perk for double shout builds, which ours is, since it increases shout duration by 30%. Not a bad choice, but it's tough to give up one of our current perks for this. Now for skills, our first skill is Rage. Rage. Rage might currently be the fastest move skill in the game that still lets you attack since Fighter's Sprint was nerfed. You might be tempted to think of it as a buff since it also raises your strength and vigor by 10, but remember it also lowers your physical damage reduction by 20%, which for white gear queues means you'll likely have negative armor. That's really bad since you'll take much more damage against physical damage dealers, so only use it when you need to catch up to someone, not as a buff. It basically makes you temporarily faster but also squishier. The exception is if you're fighting wizards since only your physical damage reduction goes down, not your magical. The second skill is Savage Roar. Instead of affecting you, this shout affects enemies, causing most but not all mobs to get scared and either stand still or run away from you. But the main reason we use this skill is to lower player physical power bonus by minus 40%. Remember all those perks we put on to significantly increase our strength? This perk effectively lowers enemy players' strength by 40, so we're doing much more damage and they're doing much less. Of course, this only applies to physical damage dealers, but now, unless you get outplayed, you should win all of your melee trades. The only exception to this is Longsword, and that's pretty much this build's counter. Even if the fighter is debuffed, Longsword riposts do insane damage, so make sure not to get parried. For honorable mentions, a lot of barbarians like Achilles Strike because it's a great skill for slowing players down. But if you're not running Rage, some classes will outrun you and you'll never get close enough to hit them with Achilles Strike. This forces you to throw a Francisca Axe with Achilles to proc the effect so you can catch up. I haven't found this to be very reliable, and Rage by itself seems to be enough with this build to catch any class. Plus, if you're still really struggling to catch a player, you can temporarily take off your helmet and leggings while chasing, since you're not wearing a chest piece and gloves and boots don't slow you down. Not only that, but Rage also helps you run away, whereas Achilles is more just for slowing someone down. I wouldn't run Rage and Achilles because Savage Roar gives a huge advantage in melee trades. There's also Warcry, which increases HP for yourself and nearby allies by 25% for 7 seconds, which can be very helpful in a team setting depending on your composition. But for solos, you'll have to be fast enough to catch kiting classes and also maximize your advantage to win against meleeers, which is why we run Rage and Savage Roar. We talked about Squire gear, but what else should you be looking for? Try to upgrade from gray adventurer boots to white boots for an extra dexterity point. Do the same with cloth pants for yet another dex point. Try to find leather gloves or buy them in bulk from the leathersmith when they're available. Grays are fine since you get 2 dexterity, whether from the gray gloves or the white ones. For your helmet, the visored sallet is best for white gear matches since you get the same dex as a Barbuda helmet with the same mobility. You just lose some magic resist in exchange for higher armor and higher headshot damage reduction. If you're playing higher gear matches though, definitely switch to the Barbuda helm. For weapons, use the Bardiche. It has amazing damage with great range and an awesome 1-2 combo poke that destroys mobs and players. It also has an impact value of 5, which gets raised to 6 thanks to our Crush perk, letting you easily break the guards of Heater Shield and Lantern Shield users. It also doesn't slow you down as much thanks to the Steam release patch that reduced its movement speed penalty. Also, since it has great range, you don't get hard countered by long range Achilles Barbarian since that would otherwise lock you down while you can't reach them back. So definitely stock up on Bardiches when the weaponsmith sells them and do his quest so that he'll hopefully eventually sell you white Bardiches. For your secondary, I recommend bringing a Viking sword and a lantern. While the Bardiche is an amazing weapon, it's terrible at chasing down runners. The Viking sword lets you move much faster to chase players down, while the lantern lights your way to keep an eye out for ranger traps. Yes, you could bring a round shield instead, but then your secondary set's move speed penalty is almost as bad as the Bardiche's penalty. Practice dodging and juking your enemy's shots rather than blocking them because for low gear runs, the shield isn't worth it. The Viking sword and lantern combo is also great for looting because the lantern gives lots of light with no movement penalty, while your Viking sword has an impact power of 3, which is enough to break pots in one hit. Just remember that your Viking sword is for chasing and looting, not for damage. That's your Bardiche's job. Lastly, if you really want to squeeze in a green piece of gear, I recommend a green version of your adventurer boots with additional movement speed. Barbarian is the worst ranged class in the game, so movement speed is extremely helpful. And since boots are the only piece of equipment that can have movement speed boosts, the green gear you bring would have to be your boots. Just remember to stay at 24 gear score or below. Do not go 25 or higher, otherwise you could get matched against players with legendary gear. And if you're a new player, then you're not ready for those fights. Finally, bring 9 health potions and 15 bandages, or at least what the squire gave you, then it's time to join a dungeon. For map choice, you'll ultimately want to do every map so you can complete all your quests, but I recommend you avoid ice caves for the start. Ice caves is definitely the hardest map currently, so start with crypts crypts or goblin caves instead. And if you do crypts, don't enter the red gates until you feel comfortable with the normal game first. The red gates lead to Inferno, which is much harder than the crypts. Now in your match as a new player, take things nice and slow. Pull mobs one at a time, then bait their attacks before counter-attacking with your own. Remember, this isn't Skyrim. You want to defeat monsters without taking any damage whatsoever. You need to stay at full HP at all times in case a player jumps you, so don't trade with mobs. Learn positioning and timing as well as aiming for the head to quickly defeat them. Smash chests to loot for gold, quest items, and better gear, but prioritize sellables, especially at higher rarities since these make you the most money. If you run into a player who pushes you for melee, pull out your Bardiche, but don't activate Rage, because you don't need the movement speed, but it will make you squishier. Pop Savage Roar to weaken the player, then easily win your trade with your Bardiche. Now don't rush to loot. First, heal yourself up by drinking a potion first, then 3 bandages, then another potion, and so on and so forth until you're back to full HP. It's important to heal first because fighting makes noise and another player might be coming to third party you, so you don't want to be injured. Once you've recovered and the coast is clear, loot the dead player for meds and shinies. If you run into a ranged player, the right decision will be situational, but you may need to chase them down. Jump towards them while pressing X to stow your weapon without losing move speed, then rage and chase them down. As you get close, if they decide to turn and burst you down, pull out the Bardiche, use Savage Roar if their damage is physical, and win the trade. If they keep running, use the Viking Sword to train them down. But if even that's too slow, pull out your torch and keep whacking them with it until they either die or turn around, allowing you to pull out a better weapon to win the trade and claim their loot. Also keep an eye on the time at the bottom right and watch for blue icons on your minimap to see where you can extract. It doesn't matter how many kills you get or how much loot you find, if you don't get out alive, you lose it all. So make sure you have an escape plan so you can get out with all your loot. Sell sellables to the collector and unwanted gear to most of the other merchants, then restock on heals and go back in. Rinse and repeat to level up and make more gold till you feel you're ready for higher geared runs and even high roller. Subscribe for more Dark and Darker guides and best of luck in your runs.